I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident techno-progressive.
And I'm Nir Eisikovits, philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies. Today we're talking about facial recognition software, about computer programs that take your face and automatically match it to a database of other faces. And Nir, I have a personal gadget investment in this, in that I've always wanted a gadget that would show me the names of people that I'm interacting with in my glasses. That's, when I saw Terminator, like many people, when the head-up display in the cyborg shows the different objects in the room, that's what I want. I want that. And when Google Glass was being rolled out in 2011, that was one of the first things that Google said that they were not going to allow it to do because it freaked people out so much. And I've always been annoyed that other people are so sillily Luddite that they wouldn't want this obvious human enhancement technology. So, okay, tell me why you're afraid of people knowing each other's names.
So basically, your argument is that to honor our middle-aged brains that can't remember any names, you'll throw away privacy to the wind just so you can know.
Consequentially, how many political prisoners on the run from the FBI are here, and over here, how many middle-aged brains that need help with names were here? The consequential logic works out for me.
I'll take the boomer charm of not remembering half the people's name every day over being identified wherever I walk. But that is actually, I have to say, that is actually a pretty cool use case, walking around and being able to pretend that you are excellent with names, which you wouldn't be without it.
But okay, so policing, obviously, I understand the dystopian fears. Believe me, I've been talking about fascism nonstop for the last 8 years. So I understand why people don't want governments to have the tools for dystopia. But I think that in case of facial recognition, it just doesn't make any sense to me that the police wouldn't be able to use this technology when they have fingerprinting. They already do facial recognition. They take a picture from a crime scene and they try to match it to people. Right. They just do it with these manual methods instead of statistical methods. They have fingerprints. They have witness DNA descriptions. They have all kinds of things that they use to determine identity. I don't see why this is any different.
So let's back up a bit. Let's establish a sort of a common background for a moment. So facial recognition, like you said, are the programs that match a face to a given database of faces. The maybe most famous and most controversial use of it is by law enforcement, and essentially it started with law enforcement using specialized cameras to capture an image of you or me walking down the street somewhere if they're lucky, and it's near a crime scene, and then match it with a database that they had. And then along came a company which has since become famous because the New York Times reporter wrote a book about it called Clearview AI. And what they introduced was this pretty straightforward but revolutionary variation that they scraped all the faces that they could find on the internet. So from social media and from open image searches. And that became the database of faces that, for example, a police or an FBI or CIA can work with. And so that became the software became a lot more capable. So that's broadly what we're talking about when we talk about facial recognition now, is the ability to, given software like Clearview AI, match it not just with the database that the police has of people who've been whatever, either convicted or arrested or etc., but with all the faces available on the internet.
And individual hackers have done pretty much the same thing with AI tools. They've been able to go around on their campus and demonstrate that, with augmented reality glasses, you can identify the identity of other people relatively quickly just by flipping through publicly available images. Yeah. So it's not restricted to this one company, but they perfected it. It's also in use in many other domains. So, for instance, there used to be a tool until they turned it off in Google Google, and it may still be there, in Google Photos, where you automatically picks the faces
Right.
through all the photos and will give you a clump. This is your wife, this is your daughter, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. But you have to specifically train it first to do
Yeah,
that.
you have to tell it which ones you
yeah.
want it to recognize.
Right. And most famously, it's
Facebook used to do that as well in
Right.
in labeling people and images.
And it's used to give you access to your phone and some other devices. The difference there is that the data set is obviously much smaller. On your phone, it's a data set of one, and in your pictures, it's the data set of your pictures. When it comes to, Clearview AI and the police or whoever, whatever other agencies are using it, it's the data set of everyone. And for your fantasy of eternal youth and the young brain, I think it also is more helpful if the data set is huge, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So just on that, on the size of the data set, I mean, the issues around the training of LLMs and LLM art and LLM writing, is it a violation of people's intellectual property to take their image and use it for this kind of a training purpose? There's a similar question here, which is it a violation of someone's rights to take an image of their face and train this data set on them? And then the question is, well, what kinds of rights did you give up when you decided to allow your image to be broadcast to the world, right? Most of us have tens of thousands of images of ourselves that we voluntarily gave over to the world to look at.
Yeah. I mean, the consent question is interesting. So, did you actually voluntarily give up your image to the world by going on social media? And did you give it up to the world for all purposes? There's some, weird implied consent questions there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can imagine other uses that people
Right.
might put your image to that you didn't consent to, but which
Right.
everyone
Right.
knows is something that could happen if your image is out there. So
yeah. To be honest, I'm not as worked up at all about consent questions. I think part of being an honest Luddite is trying to use the technology less so that your resources are available less for other people. Facial recognition is weird because it's one of the cases in which it goes wrong and misidentifies a suspect, et cetera, are very well publicized. But what's not well publicized is that's probably the most quickly improving technology of many of the AI applications. So it is becoming very quickly very good. Its accuracy rate is 95%. I think.
I remembered when you brought that ACLU lady, who was the Massachusetts ACLU, who's been working on facial recognition. I'm spacing on her name. Yeah, that the Massachusetts ACLU and ACLU in general is pretty good on this, but their focus on facial recognition genetic testing, I think, was what she was talking about at the time. Is the misfires, the errors can do injustice to people, which is absolutely true. But the genetic stuff in particular is fascinating because it's let so many people off of death row. The idea that we finally have a technology that could determine people's innocence, but the only attention of the human rights community is on the accidental injustices that are committed by statistically going to be committed by any identity technology. So
Right.
that problem goes back to the errant use of fingerprints and IDs, for hundreds of years.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the first criticism that comes up against facial recognition systems is the bias issue, and that the bias issue and the accuracy issue are closely tied, so that it's better at recognizing the faces of some races and men specifically and white men specifically. It's best at doing that, and that it makes makes more and more mistakes when it's not. But the truth is that that's improving exponentially. So I think we can actually bracket that in some way, or at least say this is an eminently technical problem that can and will be solved and is actually being solved.
Right.
And that just like it can be an exonerating technique, even, it's also used in some cases for enhancing military targeting. Here too, on the one hand, that's creepy. And on the other hand, it's very easy to imagine how that can economize on collateral collateral damage rather than, make it worse. And
I
to
mean,
just
yeah,
finish.
satellite monitoring of rebel hideouts is a form of facial recognition, I suppose.
Right, right. And, interestingly, like there's a lot of use of predictive analytics in bail decisions, for example, and in parole decisions. And those are famously crappy. Those are like their success rate is closer to 50% than to
Well,
95%, and still they're being used. So in that
I
sense, this has a huge advantage.
I don't think people are really trying to use facial recognition inappropriately, but there are lines of research which are obviously inappropriate for any kind of application. One would be guessing people's ideological, guessing whether they're telling the truth or not. So facial
Yeah.
recognition for truth telling has been something that companies have been trying to do for a long time. That does not work well yet.
No.
And so you should never have it as a TSA scanner or something like that. Facial recognition for political views or sexuality, things like that. There are correlations, and people apparently can, and computers can make judgments relatively quickly about those kinds of things.
Although I doubt that's a 95%
No,
success rate. Yeah.
no, it's it's
Anywhere
better than
near it.
average, but
Yeah.
and so you don't want any of that filtering
No.
out. But
No.
but for the purposes
But-
of just figuring out who somebody is.
Right.
So the other thing that I think is complicated here is like we can object to ubiquitous surveillance and not object to facial recognition. So in other words, should the camera that's looking at you when you're taking money out of the ATM, should that have facial recognition on it? Probably.
Yeah.
And would you object? Probably not. But if it's just you walking down the street, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, there I think you can take the Chinese use case as a dystopian example of what happens when the camera that's looking at you at the ATM is used for all other purposes. So that
right. Well, every transaction in China, it goes into central data. So.
Right. So famously, facial recognition is being used to track the Uyghur minority in China, and the Communist Party boasts that the technology can actually identify a Uyghur, so it's so that it has the capacity to sort of make these kind of ethnic racial distinctions for it. And then it's being put to all kinds of, more idiotic uses, like issuing people tickets automatically for jaywalking. I guess the Chinese have a problem of people using too much toilet paper in public toilets, so that you have to look into a camera every time you get your dispensal, and so that you can't like steal toilet paper from public toilets. So there's an absurd level to which you can proliferate the use. So, but I do think, like as our strategy always is, I do think it's good to sort of minimize disagreement. And so I think that it wouldn't be crazy to say that the bias problem of facial recognition is A, smaller than other AI applications, and B, getting smaller and smaller, and will soon not be a problem. So the question is, are there grounds left to object to it? You gave one ground, namely, can we regulate how much it expands into all areas? One thing to use it in identifying suspects, the other to survey your own population about whether they're towing the ideological line.
Right. And, like there have been efforts to measure the faces of students in Chinese classrooms to determine whether they're absorbing Xi Jinping thought, as well.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm fully cognizant of the totalitarian applications. I would just point out about the Chinese facial recognition uses for the credit score system that it also has the effect of people who were caught on camera committing animal cruelty or being mean to the homeless or other kinds of things that the Chinese, feel like are bad social behaviors that need to be cleaned up. Those have been caught. And I do think that, to the extent that it has a salubrious effect on public morality, there may be evidence that public surveillance in China has had a positive effect.
Yeah.
There aren't that many. There aren't that many dissidents to track in China because they don't raise their head up anymore. So
yeah, look, this is in some ways the liberal question more broadly. I love animals. Is a society in which you can catch every person who's instantly who's cruel to animals, is that a huge sign of social progress? I mean, we go to questions around the value of privacy. But before we go there, I want to just go back to something you said earlier. You said that this is becoming akin to fingerprinting and DNA. Certainly, the police think so, and certainly there's quite a few scholars and analysts who are saying this is just like people made the same, which is true. People made the same arguments about
Yeah.
fingerprinting and DNA when they came out, and
There's an error rate. We have to be
yeah.
cognizant of that.
Right, right. And they've been used to exonerate people. There is one flaw in that analogy or in that trajectory, which is more or less fingerprints and DNA, certainly fingerprints, need to, well, as I'm saying it, I'm thinking it's not completely true, but they need to be collected a little bit more actively than facial recognition, right? I mean, you might leave your fingerprints and your DNA behind, but you can be careful and then you'd be less likely to leave them behind. Facial recognition, the collection is a little bit, I guess, more ubiquitous and a little bit more passive. Do you agree with that? And is that an issue?
Well, it reminds me of Gattaca, my favorite movie, because in Gattaca they're constantly going around with vacuum cleaners and scraping up
Right.
the ambient DNA to see what was there.
Right.
I don't know that makes any difference whether
Yeah.
the trace, the evidentiary trace that you left is fresh or 2 days old.
Well, the question is, how much effort do the authorities have to put into finding you, as it were? And with facial recognition, it seems like the effort level is going down. And to the extent that the effort level is going down, your vulnerability as an individual goes up.
Right. I mean, compared to genetics and fingerprints, we know how to spoof the facial recognition, right? We know how to put on gloves for fingerprints, and I don't know exactly what you do to prevent your genes from being spread at a crime scene. So I'm not sure that it's entirely different from other kinds of evidence.
Yeah, I guess that's one question that we can leave open to our listeners so that they can decide it. Is this analogy between fingerprints and DNA and facial recognition on the other hand perfect? In my sense, the analogy is flawed because it's easier to collect facial data than the other one, although it's a difference of degree rather than quality.
Right. Talking about spoofing them makes me think about another use case of facial recognition, which is to record and dox people at public demonstrations. And demonstrators around the world have been experimenting with different kinds of masks that obscure the capacity of facial recognition. So, I think people should have a right to wear those masks, and I don't think it's illegal. If it was a neo-Nazi rally, I think we'd all agree. Maybe we want to know who those guys are. Maybe we would dox them or immediately arrest them, but we want to know who they are.
Yeah. I mean,
a neo-Nazi rally just happened in Columbus, Ohio, by the way.
Right. There's a technical answer to that, which is that the companies are already trying to get better at identifying people wearing masks and wearing all kinds of face coverings. I know that some of the facial recognition technology the Israelis have been using in the West Bank and in Gaza have been saying that they're better at that. There, actually, the accuracy rates are specifically lower, and we can talk about the Israeli use case in a bit. I guess I will say, isn't there something depressing and kind of dystopian in itself in the fact that you have to wear a mask in a demonstration? In other words, do you want that to be? It seems to part of the idea of a public demonstration is being out in public, and so if you have to cover your face for doing
people said, "I'm going to go to this demo, but I don't want anybody to know my identity." I mean, sometimes they would wear, balaclavas or white hoods or whatever. But
but now because facial recognition, I'm not sure it's only because of facial recognition, by the way, that people are covering their faces. The more, in the more controversial context, just people like being spotted by TV and newspapers without facial recognition. People have lost their jobs for demonstrating, and you could make an argument similar to the argument that you made about us being out and about on social media. You go out, you demonstrate, you think it's important enough, you take certain risks, and if you don't get a job because you demonstrated, then maybe you find another job, or maybe you don't want a job that would not be handed to you because you demonstrated for something. So
yeah, I do think this is connected to the questions about the value of internet anonymity, which has been something we've debated since the beginning of the net, about whether everyone on the net should have a verified identity or whether you can be here anonymously. And I think most of us would prefer to have the option of anonymity, unless you're being harassed by a troll, somebody who can't figure out who they are or how to stop them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you brought up actually about the demonstrations is important because it's illustrative of the question that I do think is interesting about facial recognition. And I don't think that question is misrecognitions or bias. I think it's the psychological impact of being surveyed. So you gave one use case, namely demonstrations in the age of facial recognitions are going to have more people with their faces covered, and there seems to be something problematic about a fundamentally public activity where people are going to cover their faces. So it makes demonstrations in some way more ominous and degraded and diminished and less of a political activity. I think, a variation on that same point.
But do you stop that by campaigning against police use of facial recognition? Or do you stop? I don't know how you stop this.
I mean, yeah, that's one direction of stopping it. The other direction of stopping it is to convince people that they can take a risk in the name of the things that they believe in. If the broader liberal system / the system of the rule of law is such where some basic freedoms are guaranteed, and that's increasingly, by the way, not the case even in the West. So it's actually a real question. But I would say that just like all the commercials say about investing coming with risks, demonstrations comes with risk too. Life comes with risks in general. So and that there's a kind of grow up argument to be made there, but it's just one example of a broader
which
point.
Chinese kids who tried to obscure their faces during the protests against zero COVID policies, they discovered that the Chinese government could figure out who they were anyway. I mean, the other thing is that facial recognition isn't the only technology coming down the pike. There's also gait recognition, which is to recognize a distinct signature about how people walk and how their musculature
move their body.
Yeah, and there's no way to spoof that yet.
No,
unless you learn to walk like a Fremen from Dune. But.
Yeah. Although again, I think it's gonna take a while until that's anywhere as good as facial recognition is at its core function. But take that same kind of point and take a place like London, which is probably one of the most networked CCTV cities in the world, where facial recognition is used on a massive kind of scale. There's an argument that just walking into spaces that are heavily surveilled is going to change your behavior, is going to potentially have a chilling effect. So here's where I answer your question about the middle-aged brain in the beginning of our conversation, namely on the other side of the ledger is, do you want a chilling effect on walking into spaces that are heavily surveilled? We know people behave differently when they're subject to photography and surveillance and being videotaped. And so there's one question about the change of behavior. There's another more broad philosophical question, the kind of question that comes from, John Stuart Mill and his classical argument about individuality, that you need a private space, you need a space free from surveillance, where you can have experiments in living, where you can be an idiot, where you can be an asshole relatively unharmfully, freely, and know that you're not being surveyed, so that you can develop and grow into yourself. Are you at all worried about that?
Well, I'm a committed Millsian, although with some Buddhist caveats. But idea, I do think that this is the right place to start the fundamental discussion, is the realm of, perfect privacy where no one knows anything about you, and the realm of complete lack of privacy where all of your secrets are in the public domain. Nobody wants either position, and we're all someplace in between. And the question is where you push it back and forth, what the lines are that you draw. So in our current society, it's not like we have perfect privacy, because I have to show my personal ID to do many activities of daily life, and mail comes to this house because I have an ID and it's been verified, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not perfect privacy in our world. And I would argue that we should protect a realm of privacy. But I think the counter argument comes from someone like David Brin, who wrote a book 20 years ago about how ubiquitous surveillance is in our future. And we have to carve out this realm of privacy out of this growing capacity for ubiquitous surveillance. And the ubiquitous surveillance can be a benefit to us, but it can also impinge this realm of privacy. I agree with that. That's the general problem. But the question is, are the particular is fighting the application of algorithmic facial recognition what protects this realm of privacy? I think what threatens the realm of privacy is always politics. It's not the technology. It's whether you live under a totalitarian regime or not, or an authoritarian regime or whatever. And the technologies are going to exist.
Well, that's
right.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you,
our opposition to facial recognition doesn't stop the North Korean regime from using it, or Israel.
No, but your distinction between I wouldn't make an analogy between Israel and North Korea yet, but that's a different that's a different question.
Yeah.
But I think your distinction between politics and technology is a little artificial, because politics becomes more potent with technology, right? So it's not like, I mean, if the technology is there, then politics is going to use it. Think about our own slide from liberal democracy to majoritarian democracy, right? From liberal democracy, where the rights of minorities are protected either by the rule of law or by a constitution, to a more populist version of the same, right? Which is happening here, happening in other places. And forget about the Chinese for a minute. The marriage of a majoritarian populist version of democracy, like the one we are going to get with ubiquitous surveillance technology, is worrisome, right? You all of a sudden find facial recognitions outside of Planned Parenthood. So yes, the threat comes from politics, but different politics are more and less potent with the technology.
Well, here's the argument I'm trying to make. If you are concerned about the authoritarian uses of surveillance technology by a fascist government that we're going to be experiencing,
I don't think we're going to be experiencing that either, but it's going to be closer than it was before.
Yes. Is the most effective way to, the Archimedean lever that you're going to use, a campaign to stop facial recognition or a campaign to stop fascism? I think it's a campaign to stop the politicization of the Department of Justice and the abuse of investigatory powers of the state. And they have immense numbers of technologies and investigatory powers at their disposal. Yeah. And campaigning against facial recognition does absolutely nothing to stop any of the fascism that's coming.
I guess I disagree. Yeah, that is somewhere we're fundamental. Like, I would say the most fundamental way is to put a stick in the wheels anywhere you can. Fuck up facial recognition, screw up their email communications. Yeah, because people aren't going to even agree about the big ideological labels.
Monkey wrenching and arson is an approach to politics. I just don't think it's the most strategically effective one. I think if you have an analysis that the cause of our problems is the disorganization of the working class, or whatever your analysis is, it's a political problem. It's not, the problem is not that we suddenly had facial recognition and everything went to shit. So it's like, come on.
So if we agree on the kind of fundamental point that John Stuart Mill is making in On Liberty, again for our listeners, and we should definitely link that essay in the show notes. But the fundamental point is, specifically as a young person, by the way, which is the people that this technology technology, that's a point we didn't talk about, specifically the people who the technology affects in a disproportionate way because they're more online than older people. Their faces are more likely to be there, right? For a young person, it's important
or
to
to
have
put
a
it more
space.
pointedly, we're arguing about the rights of privacy of a generation who gives more than 10,000 of their images away every day, right?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that it doesn't. We should have a separate episode about whether privacy is dead or not. I think it's a really interesting question, but the research I've seen is that even though they've changed their habits, their philosophical beliefs about privacy are pretty similar to yours and mine.
Yeah.
There's just more of a disconnect between how they behave and what they say they believe in.
Right.
But going back to the fundamental point, so the John Stuart Mill type argument is a young person needs a protected space of privacy in order to grow into themselves, develop themselves, experiment with different kind of identities without being surveyed. And you think the better way to guarantee them that they have that is to march against fascism in the street rather than break the cameras. And I think it's break the cameras. That's unfair.
Okay, so when your daughters were coming up, were you curious at all about what they were doing online? I was. I mean, I was pretty liberal.
Yeah,
but I was pretty curious.
Yeah, and we tried to balance between kind of being responsible and giving them a space to, experiment.
Right.
And
well, there you go.
And
that's the formula right there.
Yeah, but this is great because you're being a Burkean now. You're saying that there's an analogy between how the principles that the family operates within and we give a shit about our daughters. The state doesn't. So we have their best interest.
Ideally, the state gives a shit about the public, right? And so part of the rationale for these kinds of surveillance technologies is to protect the public from something, to watch the waterway to see who's throwing their trash out, and to
I think the best thing a liberal state can do is to be relatively dysfunctional. So it doesn't interfere.
Well, this I think is another fundamental disagreement between you and I. For me, the Hegelian apotheosis of apotheosis of history is the democratic state, the efficient, idealized democratic state. And for the democratic state, for us all to have those powers, rationally regulated within the democratic state, I think will be fine, right? Any technological power, nuclear weapons.
Dr. Hughes saves the end of history. Here's our.
That's right. We are headed towards the end of it. It's a little bumpy. I gotta say, it's more bumpy than I expect, but
more like it fell off a cliff. But yeah, okay. I rest my case, sir. Some of the other use cases. We talked about the Chinese use case, and we are kind of hoping that we are immune from that, of sort of broad scale, either tracking of dissidents or tracking of silly everyday activities. That's certainly the dystopian scenario.
Yeah.
It's imaginable, especially with the threats of weaponizing government agencies, that this would be used in the new immigration policy, that it would be used in enforcing abortion policy. And these are all cases where it can be put, to pretty scary use. And even like in the abortion case, for example, just telling people that in certain states there's going to be facial recognition cameras outside of Planned Parenthoods, for example, is going to reduce the number of people who go to them, and is going to, increase risks for women. I don't know if this is going to be done. I'm assuming that the constitutionality of it can be challenged, but this is a pretty concrete potential use case. And then we said we'd mention briefly the Israeli use case. So the Israelis have been using a facial recognition system in the West Bank for years, and which they piloted primarily in Hebron, which is a city in which Jewish settlers and the Palestinians who live in the city are in close proximity. And now that system has been moved to Gaza. And in Gaza, it's being used to try to apprehend members of Hamas who are taking cover, obviously, in the population. It's being used to try to identify hostages as they're being moved from place to place. And I don't know how much it's being used in targeting. All of which to say is is this seems to be not a very successful use case of the technology. If the idea is to reduce collateral damage, or if the idea is to find more hostages, because they've not been very successful at finding hostages, and they've not been very successful at reducing collateral damage.
Yeah, I mean, the research that we get on the accuracy of facial recognition comes out of peacetime applications. I can't imagine how difficult it is to do this in a wartime.
And I'm assuming you're getting a lot of covered faces in that context, etc. So I think
I think Hamas always demonstrates with balaclavas on, don't they? They're always covering their face.
Yeah, I mean, they don't suffice with demonstrating, but it could be, this could be this kind of use. I just don't think the technology is anywhere near there yet. This kind of use could be an interesting, the warfare case could be an interesting use case, both in reducing, if the technology was completely mature, you could see that this would be promising actually as a part of a puzzle of reducing collateral damage and solving.
Well, let's add one more thing, which is drone warfare. And if you think back to 6 years ago, I think was when Future of Life Institute released their kind of imagination video of what drone warfare plus facial recognition looks like, of drones hunting down particular people.
Right.
Again, it depends on who the person is, right? I mean, why are they being hunted down? I want to know.
Right. But an American drone plus very good facial recognition plus kind of some sort of attempt to supervise and enforce the principle of discrimination or the principle of non-combatant immunity, you could see the potential of a technology like that to enhance that, but it's not there. For that, it's not there yet. Like you say, it's the 95% number is a peacetime number.
Right. I mean, and this is the argument in lethal autonomous robotics. I mean, with facial recognition on a drone isn't necessarily autonomous, because the image could pop up and say that we're 95% certain that this guy is so-and-so, and then you give the kill order or whatever. But at any rate, it's part of AI as a part of the system. At any rate, I think that that kind of a system could potentially kill fewer innocent people or people that you didn't intend to kill, or civilians, bystanders, than other systems. And I don't think that argument has been taken seriously enough by the critics community. And again, I'll just say it, that the two cultures problem in technology ethics means that people on the humanities side feel like all they need to do is find the chinks and never argue about the ethical consequences of the thing as a whole and whether it can get where it wants to go. And the STEM people don't think about that in the first place. So we keep arguing past each other. It's like, facial recognition has some flaws. Don't use it for everything. Be cautious. Regulate it. But is it an enemy? Is it a technology that has to be demonized in and of itself just because it pushes your dystopian button?
Yeah. I mean, broadly, I agree about the analysis of the two cultures problem. And by the way, we should link that essay too. We have quite a bit to link today, because that's such a classical, discussion of how differently people with a humanities sensibility and people with a technical sensibility think. I guess one place where you and I differ is, I think there's a pretty strong one of the many places where we differ is, I think there's a pretty strong historical argument to say that the use of technologies tend to spin out of control. And in that sense, even though philosophically they're not the enemy, practically they kind of are. Like,
how did fingerprinting spin out of?
Fingerprinting is a much more limited use technology than facial recognition. Like, it's not a dual. So I should say all dual use technologies tend to spin out of control, like germline genetic engineering and like facial recognition. You could still ask the question: are the benefits worth the costs? And probably in germline genetic engineering, so far they are. Facial recognition, I'm not sure. So in each of these, I think you could have a separate question of whether the benefits are worth the cost.
Do you think it makes sense to say that just back to my original use case of Google Glass, because one of the examples that you wrote down for today is facial recognition out of Planned Parenthood. So basically, you're presuming that some right-to-lifer is using facial recognition to dox in real time people who are going into a Planned Parenthood.
Well, my concern was more, a state somewhere in the South putting up one of these cameras near
and saying, you're from Mississippi, so you got an illegal abortion in Michigan.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
governmental use of the technology, we can sort of design the specific example to be accurate and plausible, but yeah.
Again, it's the cross-state enforcement of anti-abortion laws that would be the way to fight that, not to fight facial recognition use by police.
Why are these mutually exclusive? At the very least,
you're saying I got identified getting an abortion in Michigan, and I'm so mad that they used facial recognition. I'm going to devote my life to stopping the use of facial recognition by Mississippi police.
I'm going to say, given the other concerns, it's going to be part of the strategy. I mean, look, what you're saying is, let me wear my Google glasses so I can pretend not to forget people's names.
Yeah.
While I march against, fascism and authoritarian government, right?
Well, okay, but here's the concept of Google Glass to me is resonant of the concept of surveillance, right? Bottom up surveillance. Yeah. For me to walk down the street and not only know the names of the other demonstrators with me, but of each cop that I look at, so that I automatically dox them. I know that if this cop that's going to beat up on me, what his name was and his badge number.
Yeah.
That is a form of citizen empowerment, as far as I'm right. Your ability. Why did we suddenly have the focus on police brutality? It's because we all carry around cameras in our pockets and can take pictures of police brutality and show it to the entire world. That's surveillance. Yeah. So our capacity to do citizen facial recognition, for me, is ethically and politically different from the state. And I think the state should have.
Don't forget the other half of the citizens who are going to be very motivated to beat the shit out of you because of your views that they can now access with their Google glasses too.
And that's what happened with Google Glass, is that people started to harass people wearing Google Glass in public because they were worried about being surveilled. And Ray-Ban's augmented reality glasses has a little red light so that when the camera comes on, it tells everybody that you have the camera on. Mm-hmm. I think that's fine. I mean, those are normative responses, indigenous, organic, normative responses where people say, I do not want to know that you are recording me in this situation unless you have a light on your head.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I slide back and forth between the sort of authoritarian concern on the one hand and the much more kind of benign, but in a way, the much more insidious, just that you need privacy for a kind of spontaneity sort of concern.
Look, you're talking to a guy who hasn't left his house in 4 years, so it's not as if I disagree with that.
So from the privacy of your confinement there,
right. I think everyone should lose their privacy. Just don't come on my 40-acre property here in Connecticut.
There you go. So our Nietzschean friend Elon Musk and his Nietzschean friend Ramaswamy, I apologize. The two Nietzscheans, Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, are going to kill work from home, apropos not leaving your house for 5 years. Right, so their newest big cry is to eliminate work from home in the federal government, and that everybody should come in 5 days a week, and the taxpayers shouldn't have to subsidize that. Do you think that's going to work? Do you think it's going to have a trickle-down effect to the private sector? Do you think that's big? Do you think it's bullshit?
I followed very closely the whole discourse around work from home and the statistics around how many of us are experiencing it. And I'll say I think it's politically more significant than people give it credit, work from home issue, because during COVID, I think it was one of the things that really underlined the class difference between college-educated workers and non-college educated workers. The idea of essential workers who had to put their lives on the line to deliver your DoorDash, et cetera, et cetera. So the work from home thing is important from a political point of view. The big tech companies have been sending signals, the big tech CEOs have been sending signals that some of them are really want to wind it back and have people in the office 5 days a week. DC has been more resistant, and the Biden administration more tolerant, of course, but Musk has not. Musk has been a more of a, be in the office 80 hours a week kind of guy when or at least according to his, the Twitter stories and the SpaceX stories. So we'll see. I mean, he's already been fairly explicit that as some of the CEOs have been, that this is an attempt to weed out the workforce. You come in or you quit, and he knows that half of them are going to quit. And there still is a robust remote job market out there. So it's not like federal employees have an impossibility, but there are going to be a lot of them, and the whole job market is probably changing very quickly. The job market for programmers appears to be already impacted by automation. So it depends on the job and which regulatory agency.
It just doesn't seem to me that the real argument here is an economic efficiency argument, because the jury is still out about whether there's any drop at all with work from home and productivity. And I've seen some data that there's an increase in productivity, and it kind of depends. It seems to be more of a kind of, more of a sort of glee for disruption.
I would put it more pointedly. I would say it's a glee for reestablishing the authority of the boss over the worker, don't you? I mean, if I can't see you, I don't know if you're actually under my thumb or not, right? So that's the whole thing, is that the authoritarian structure of the office was disrupted by work from home. So I don't think I think it's going to be resisted, but they're already in shock and depression because the Trump administration wants to implement Schedule F. I don't know all the details, but basically it means that he's going to be able to fire a lot more federal workers than he was previous time and appoint political appointees in their place. So they all know that's coming, and so that plus work from home being ended.
Yeah, I mean, here it seems like the private sector is going to have an advantage, because the tech companies still need to recruit people, and if enough people want to continue working from home, then there's going to be work from home, and the federal government isn't susceptible to the same kind of thing, especially since Musk and his associates would be more than happy to cut the workforce, as you say, by quite a lot. So that has been one of the more interesting social and economic changes in the wake of the pandemic. And as you say, it's kind of changed the power dynamic between bosses and their employees. And rolling that back in some sense would be a shame, I think. I know it would be.
I mean, I don't hold any prayers about whether in every circumstance work from home would be more productive than being in the office. I'm sure that there's going to be a long period of adjustment. And what we need are the demonstration of models of work from home that are more efficient, of networked businesses where all the employees work from home, that are more efficient. And I don't know that there's a lot of examples yet. So we're still in a hybrid experimental phase, but we're certainly not in a phase where it's, as you say, where there's any evidence that forcing everyone back to the office is going to be to benefit.
Yeah. And my other news item was actually coming from Musk as well. And it's been his argument. There's some news that came out this week about the failures of the F-35s, the advanced fighter jet, and how hard it has been to make them do everything that they're supposed to do, including their radar evasion capacities, how hard it's meant to get parts for them. And Musk, as part of the efficiency push, has said, only idiots would continue building these kind of fighter planes that are so expensive, which they are. The future of warfare is in swarms of drones, and he released this relatively impressive footage of a gigantic drone swarm. In fairness, some people in the military are saying the same, namely in a future conflict with China, we're underprepared because they would be sending very cheap swarms of drones that are carriers. We're putting the money into the wrong kind of things. Drones are much more easy to replace than warships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is sort of breathtaking to me is that there's a person with, the clearest conflict of interest that you could possibly imagine, now with an increasing say about defense policy, coupled with, with Hegseth, the new Pentagon chief, who is also coming in with a bomb throwing sensibility. So the combined sensibility of a bomb thrower and a dude who, wants to make money from building the drones that he says are more plausible than airplanes is kind of scary.
Yeah, I heard something about rural Starlink access being something that the Trump administration wants to reopen, that the FCC had decided that encouraging fiber optic broadband access for rural Americans was a better option than Starlink. But there's multi tens of $billion Starlink contract to set up Starlink access for all rural Americans. So he's got a number of things that he's got on his wish list that he wants out of this whole process. Look, I think we have to keep two things in mind at the same time, and it's been hard in the last 8 years, but that the liberals and the left and just sensible people should have a critique of the American deep state. There are many things wrong with it that need to be fixed. There are many clusters of compromised, vested interests. So in the case of the military-industrial complex, of course, we know that there are weapon systems that, because they provide jobs for thousands of people in certain districts, and Lockheed Martin has $100 billion contract, that's hard to get rid of these things. And if someone like Elon Musk or RFK going into our regulatory apparatus and saying, hey, look, the corporations have too much power over this particular approval process, let's break this up. There could be places where people agree with the general thrust of these policies, and this is something I've been worrying about. I think there's an ethics of fascist collaboration that we have to deal with here. When is it your obligation to rationally acknowledge that the clock has been correct twice a day because it's stopped at 12, and when is it your obligation to only attack?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know exactly where that bar is, but I see people softening on RFK and looking for where positive things could happen. What's his policy?
He's a clock that's been right twice a day.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I guess he's right specifically on processed foods, or a lot of his processed foods claims are correct, both health wise and in terms of the food industrial complex, and
right.
He's wrong about vaccines. So
right. Anyway, I think Elon's if he wants to disrupt the military industrial complex, some of it could be good. I personally think we should be prepared to defend Taiwan, and that's one of the things that's in question here about whether we.
I would just be happier if someone who wants to disrupt the military-industrial complex didn't have a conflict of interest problem. So
right.
such an inherent one. I guess
his conflict of interest may align. It may align with military preparedness, or it may not. We just don't know.
Yeah. I guess more broadly, this is a Burkean point. I guess in the sensibility, what is kind of breathtaking to me is the level, the embrace of brazenness and irreverence as principles. I'll
putting the Doge dog on the whole project, and
and almost as a sort of badge of honor to appoint people who are going to piss people who are going to piss the spectators off, and just appointing them because I can. And Elon saying, let's stack the military with drones because I know more about those, and it's not very concealed. And I guess what I do find interesting in Burke's insights about politics is he's like, yes, and it's not that different from the point that you're making. It might surprise you. Is this idea that yes, the system might be broken in some fundamental ways which need reform, but you have to take it seriously. You have to sort of approach it with a degree of reverence, because it has a profound potential impact on how all of our lives go, and the glee and kind of blowing politics up, which is the only alternative that we have for living together, is inappropriate in that sense. And I'm seeing a lot of that. At least half of the appointments are sort of gleeful, brazen, irreverent kind of projects. lives, and half of them are sort of in the bounds of normal. It's a weird duality.
Yeah, it's actually the Russian experts that I've found the most useful in analyzing this administration, because they talk about the Siloviki in around Putin, who are the powerful men, and the Siloviki are the ones who are in control of the powerful ministries, the ones that really matter, and everybody else is just like, just there to support the king. But the powerful ministries are defense, intelligence, justice, and so those are the places where we had the biggest fights. But yeah, they've got a roster of thousands and thousands of people. We're never going to be able to keep up with all the people that they're going to be appointing, who are crazy.
Yeah.
All right.
You can wear your glasses and retreat into your estate.
Hey, look, I'm serious. I will spring for a pair for both of us if you think it would increase our research capacity here. The Ray-Bans, I think that they have a data readout, but they don't have facial recognition, so that's the thing. I'm waiting for the facial recognition.
Yeah. Well, I will just walk around with you and be very proud of you for your ability to identify faces and say, ask this guy.
Well, that's the thing. I don't also want people to think it's because of the cannabis, that I'm losing it.
There you go.
Talk to you, man.
Talk to you.